Major events, like the war in Vietnam, capture the world's attention for a moment. But what happens to the people who are left behind when the story grows cold? The cries of the desperate do not go unheard. Throughout the whole earth, God searches the hearts of men to find those who will give their lives to His purpose.
To an El Shaddai kind of dream.
The way I heard the story was that in 1979, two pastors and two farmers somewhere in northern Canada wanted to help people in other countries. They set up the organization that we now call A&D World Missions. These men heard about the great needs of children who were often by the Vietnam War. They asked Al and Terry Purvis to travel around to churches in Western Canada to raise support for this new mission. After 2 months of promoting this vision, the Purvis knew that God was calling them to come to Thailand. In 1981, they arrived in Bangkok with their 3 little children. Al and Terry spent their first 6 months in prayer to give birth in the Spirit to the family God would build. Al and Terry met a man who took them to a refugee village in north-central Thailand. This is where they found the children they have been praying for. Each child that God brought into the family had a tragic history and many problems to overcome. But as the children grew, the group became a family. We call it the El Shaddai family. My name is Ia, and I was adopted into the El Shaddai family when I was about 3 years old.
Boys call us to an El Shaddai kind of dream.
I grew up with a strong desire to have my own children's home. I was married 5 years ago. My husband and I have 2 children, and we are now the parents of the second El Shaddai's home. So far in our home, we have 14 kids. God didn't just save us from the trouble, but He has called everyone for us to a great future. Today, many of us have become leaders in ministry because of the vision that God gave to those men in Canada. Growing up with such encouragement has let us see what a big future God has for us.
This really is one of the biggest decisions we've ever made in our lives. After we gave birth to the Children's Home Ministry in Thailand, we went back to Canada and really had to consider the options for the future. As these children are waiting in Thailand to be cared for and to be raised up and trained up in the way that God had put the vision in our hearts, we really had to commit not only the duration of our lives, but everything that we had to this ministry. And I can remember coming back here and starting the ministry on a long-term mentality, idea that we're going to be here for the long run. And looking at these little children that we had in our home, and it seemed like it was going to be forever before we were really going to be able to get out of the house and do the things that we had in our hearts. I mean, I wanted to preach and teach and those kind of things, and here we were at the prime of our lives with all these children. And God's wisdom is absolutely amazing, as we prayed and travailed in prayer in those first months for the right children to come in. God handpicked these kids out of the jungles and out of different circumstances in life and brought them together and built the El Shaddai family. And now we see 20-some years later that they are growing up and they're just beginning to go into ministry and do all kinds of things on their own.
And here we are 20 years later, and our kids have grown up. We still have almost a dozen still left in our house. And it's been a thrill just being mom and dad and watching God do things in their lives. We've seen so many miracles in their lives, in our own lives, and in our home. And you know, it's given our kids visions and dreams of things stirred up in their spirit that they want to do. And like right now, they have this dream of cutting a CD in Canada and bringing it back for the nation of Thailand, for the youth here. As last Ruth said, she wants to bring this God music to this nation. And so it's exciting watching what's happening with our kids. And it's exciting being parents and watching God change these children into young adults serving the Lord.
And we had a vision in those years that God was going to really raise up these little children to become great leaders in the nation. And we're seeing that, aren't we? The things that God's putting in their hearts and the development of the gifts and the calling of God in their lives. It's absolutely exciting. And we're really loving this part of the ministry, this era of the ministry, aren't we?
Yes, so why don't you come on into our house? We'll introduce some of our kids to you.
My name is Terry Purvis. I'm 22 years old, and I'm currently enrolled in the multimedia production program at Lethbridge Community College. I'm working on 2 websites, victoryasian.com and continuummedia.com. I'm also upkeeping the computers here in the office, the editing stations, and the network. Growing up with 31 brothers and sisters was normal to me at the time, I guess. Never really occurred to me that, you know, it was something that people gasp at. But it was great, you know, you always had a friend, you always had someone to hang out with, someone to play with. With such a large family, you face the same problems that you have with smaller families, you know, little fights over toys and that kind of thing. But there is no great disadvantage to it, I don't think. It's been more of a plus than a minus. We were always involved in the ministry ever since we were young. Mostly musically. Our family was just gifted with music, I guess. Played drums, guitar, bass, sang a lot. We also did, you know, little errands, setting up missions banquets, you know, setting up stages, tearing down stages. One of the great moments that I can remember in ministry was actually just a few years back. We were up north ministering in the Lahu tribes, and it was probably around 8 o'clock at night. It's pitch black outside. There's no street lights, no electricity up there. You could see the stars up in the sky. And my dad was standing on the edge of a group of people. They kind of formed a half circle around him of just tribes people. And he had his Bible open and he was preaching to them, but it was so dark that he couldn't read his Bible. So a Lahu pastor hooked up a halogen lamp to the Jeep battery and held it up for, it must have been an hour and a half with one hand behind my dad. And it was just a great picture, you know. People formed around that light and they're all just so eager and so hungry for God. And, you know, God was right there, you know, He met us there. After growing up in the ministry and seeing God move, particularly seeing God move, you know, through you, and realizing that, yes, He does want to use you, you know, it does something amazing for your faith and for your call, you know. I think for me to not answer that call would be impossible. It's undeniable that it's there, and it's undeniable that that's my destiny. I think my parents have a lot to do with that. You know, I know a lot of missionaries' kids who once they go back home to finish high school or go back to get a job, you know, that's it. They forget about it. It leaves a bitter taste in their mouth, you know. Ministry is something that they just draw away from. I think my parents were really positive in our upbringing. They involved us in the ministry, and it helped us realize that it wasn't us, you know, we weren't there for my parents, you know, we weren't there for us, we were there for God and for the people God called us to. And once you realize that, it's really not hard to grow a love for ministry. I don't think any of us really consider this